This is A Story of Sorts, the podcast mostly about bookish stuff. Footnotes. Hello everyone, Karina here. On today's episode, I talk with Robin Whitten, founder of AudioFile Magazine, about audiobooks. I would also like to take the chance to say that this is the last interview of the season. I am closing off season 2 to prepare for season 3. I will probably come back sometime around December to talk about the favorite books that I've read this year. But right now I am actually preparing interviews and doing what needs to be done for season 3. I was thinking about maybe keeping up with the podcast until the end of the year, but now I am actually working more hours, and I realized that I don't have as much time and energy to put on the podcast as in the last year, because obviously due to the pandemic I was more at home, I was free. And I still want to do the podcast. I still get a lot of joy from the podcast and from talking to people. But editing, of course, takes a little longer. So I have decided that I am going to do things a little bit different next year. And I will do an episode talking specifically about that. But for now, it is then the last episode with an interview of the season. Thank you so much for being here the whole year, for the reviews, for following me on Instagram and listening to me interviewing other people and talking about books. So keep an eye out for new episodes that will be posted mostly on Tuesdays. I'm also a little bit late with this episode, but as I said, in the last few weeks, I've been a bit overwhelmed with new things in life, especially work-wise. So don't forget to subscribe to get all of the updates and to always get news of the episodes. I am also, as usual, going to continue to use my Instagram account to share bookish things. And I will talk to you soon, very soon. And we will start again back in January, full strength, with new interviews, new rect, new footnotes. I want to bring all that together. But for now, let's listen to Robin and myself talk about one of my favorite things in the world, audiobooks. Have a listen. Robin, welcome to A Story of Sorts.
Oh, thank you, Karina. Lovely to be here.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm here today because I'm the editor of AudioFile Magazine, which is a magazine that is based in the U.S. And I live in the U.S. in Maine, which is on the northeastern corner of the U.S. And we live in a beautiful state. It's not exactly a publishing center, but it is for me. And that's where I live. I started the magazine almost 30 years ago.
Yeah, I've read on the website 26 years ago. That's, yeah.
Actually, I think I should update that because it is 30.
It's been longer. That's remarkable. And it's very curious because I knew already AudioFile Magazine because a few years ago when I started listening to audiobooks, I started searching for things, I found a program that I am going to ask about later about AudioFile Magazine and Audiobook Sync, but we will get to that later.
Great.
How did your personal story with audiobooks begin?
Well, I started as a listener, as an audiobook listener, a long time ago. And I was driving around listening to audiobooks and thinking about how amazing, when I first experienced them, it's like, what an amazing experience, how it, the performance and the story just mesmerized you in a way that I hadn't really thought about. It was really a whole new experience. So I started as a listener, and I was very good friends with a librarian here in Portland, Maine, and we talked about libraries collecting audiobooks. And this is the 1990s, that was really one of the very few ways that you could find audiobooks was in a library. And we talked about how the performance and the narrator was so important, but that there was really no reviews or conversation about that aspect of audiobooks. And so I said, oh, well, I could write a newsletter without really thinking about it. And he said, that's a good idea. And so I started a little newsletter basically for librarians to help them select audiobooks. And that was 1992. So a lot has changed in the audiobook industry in that time. And yet we're still just helping people find good audiobooks, whether they're librarians, they're professionals, booksellers to recommend, or just all of us as listeners.
So basically, AudioFile Magazine started with the need to have a place where people could actually search for reviews of audiobooks and find new audiobooks.
Right, because it's very hard to often find out and discover new audiobooks, because the way we all get audiobooks, it's in a marketing environment. Mm-hmm. So the publishers and the authors who have all the money are the ones that are right up top. And so we like to discover audiobooks because all of our reviewers are audiophiles. They love audiobooks. And so that's how we try to really find things that otherwise maybe listeners wouldn't know about.
And did you find a lot of changes? Because I know, I think in the 90s still, you had CDs. Are libraries still working with CDs to this day, or it's more like digital in apps?
It's pretty much all digital. I mean, I think libraries still have CDs, but actually, when the magazine started, we were doing cassettes.
Oh yeah,
and those little square plastic things, and and they were all strewn around. They'd fall out of their box and they'd be all over the place. So it's very nice now that not only is the entire audiobook recording in one place and it just flows all together. No stopping unless you want it to.
No turning around.
That's right. That's right. No, and also that it can go everywhere with you, because of course, the way it used to be, you had to have your device with you to listen. Now we all have our phones, and your audiobook goes everywhere you do.
Yeah. Can you tell us about the story of audiobooks a little bit?
Well, let's see. Really, audiobooks started early in the 20th century. In the 1950s, I think there were audiobooks that were beginning to be recorded mostly as archival recordings of poets and writers talking about their work. And then it really took maybe until almost the 1980s before there was any kind of commercial availability of audiobooks either in libraries or in bookstores. And a lot of people, used to listen to serialized books that were on the radio. Mm-hmm. And that was a tradition in the UK and also here in the US. Which is I'll talk about why that's important to me, but that's the way, a lot of people were introduced to audiobooks. Is someone would read a chapter a day, and then the next day you would tune in and they would read another chapter. Mm-hmm. And that was one way that people were introduced to audiobooks.
That's really interesting. I write for Book Riots, and I wrote an article in which I had to do some research about audio, like books in audio form, and it always goes back to the story of, I think, Orson Welles reading War of the World or something. What's the name? I forgot the name.
But yes, it is War of the Worlds on the radio.
Yeah, people panicked, And it's very interesting to see this, the story of audiobooks and how it developed and how people listen to it. And it became such, I think nowadays, such a big thing because more and more people are listening to audiobooks.
Absolutely. And on so many different platforms, so that we have AudioFile as a podcast, but we also in the serialized form, we have a podcast that is doing that serialized. It's going back a little bit to the original idea of serializing books, and each episode of our audiobook break podcast is a chapter of an audiobook.
Yeah, so a lot of people are doing also stories for our podcast. It's just a podcast, they have a story to tell, and they're using podcasts in the audio form to do that, which is, I think, a lot more interesting in some ways. When you listen to an audiobook told by the author, you get a lot more of the author's intention when they wrote the book, and I find that super interesting.
Yes, very much so. Very much so.
You're also a jury for the Audio Awards, where the Audio Publishers Association honors the best titles in audio publishing every year. What, in your opinion, makes for a great audiobook?
Well, I have a couple things without taking the entire time just to talk about that.
You're allowed.
I have two things, because it's the storytelling is the essential part of a good audiobook. And that comes, I think, primarily from the essential match of the author and the narrator. I mean, that's very simplified, but the narrator, as you know, as a listener, has to be in tune, not just in tune, has to be able to be almost inside the mind of the author, so that they channel the intent of that author in a professional performance. They may intellectually understand it, but if they can't project it in a storytelling form, then it doesn't really work. And that, I think, is sometimes what happens with authors when they're reading their own books. Especially if it's fiction, they know the intent, obviously, because they wrote it. Yeah. But they don't have the acting skills, essentially, to project it, to emote the way, and to put that emotion into your voice, which is a highly developed skill.
Yeah, because sometimes it's curious. There are a few audiobooks that I remember listening to, and that the person making the voices for different characters, it's the same, and the voices are only slightly changed, and yet as you are listening, you kind of forget that it's the same person narrating. And I think that is amazing, that someone I remember now, for example, an audiobook for Nothing to See Here, which is an amazing book in itself. Right. And I remember thinking about the narrator, like, this person makes me forget that she is always the one reading, even though it's always the same voice.
Right. So she becomes all those characters to you, and to be able to do that, is a great art form. Yeah. So that's what, and that's what we want when we're recommending audiobooks or talking about them. That's what we want to highlight when we can find something as exciting as that, when you discover a great audiobook. Absolutely.
Who are your favorite audiobook narrators and why?
Well, that puts me on the spot a little bit, but I have an out on this one. Is that, of course, I looked on Audible UK, which I presume is where many of audiobooks are obtained in Europe, or in the different Audible iterations. But of course, that's not the same thing as everything that's available here. And one of the things that often is changed is the narrators. Yes. So I might have a favorite title is that is actually not available to you and probably many of your listeners, but Some I found. So I can commit to a few people that there's one of my favorite longtime narrators, and one of the great voices of audiobooks really is George Guidall, who has been narrating for probably several decades, many decades. He's narrated over 1,000, well over 1,000 audiobooks, and yet he's still courting today. And his, I know I'm a great fan of Craig Johnson, who has the mysteries about the Wyoming sheriff. And there's a brand new title coming out of Johnson's, and George is the narrator. He's done almost all that entire series. He's done everything from incredible literary fiction to thrillers and biographies. He's a brilliant voice. I'm a great fan of Robert Bathurst, who is the narrator of Louise Penny's mysteries. And that's like on the top of my mind because it's on the cover of the current issue of AudioFile. So, and I just listened to it and about to talk about it on our podcast, Behind the Mic. So I like Robert. Eduardo Ballerini is another wonderful voice and a great talent. He has just recorded Daniel Silva's The Cellist. I seem to be stuck on mysteries here, but I guess that's on my mind. And then also Cassandra Campbell, who is the narrator who did Crawdads.
Where the Crawdad Sings.
Where the Crawdad Sings title, which is, continued to stay on the top of many listening lists. And all of them golden voices for AudioFile, which is a designation that we have, sort of the best of the best, the lifetime achievement for narrators.
Very well. This is a little bit of a tip because I do have a feeling that obviously, since we are listening to an audiobook, a lot of the times we don't pay attention to the name of the narrator. And but then sometimes you kind of go, oh, I think I know this person from another audiobook that I really liked. And then you kind of go and figure out. And that's a very fun game, I think, to go and try to figure out, did I listen to this person before? Yes. Is it the same person?
Right, right. And it's sort of name that voice. And sometimes I do that actually when I'm watching TV and I hear a voice and I wasn't really paying attention and I'm like, that was, Simon Jones, or that was someone that I know their voice and now I have to wait or look at the credits to see where they were.
It actually happened to me recently. I was listening to Here We Are by Graham Swift, and I knew the voice and I thought, this is the taxi driver from Sherlock, like the BBC series. I didn't even know the actor's name actually by heart, and then I went to check. I was like, I was right, it's him. So it's very funny to see that, like you said, from TV or movies, or and then kind of find them in audiobooks and recognizing the voice.
and those voices are so clear in your mind. I mean, they are, they affect you and stay with you, which is one of the beautiful things about it.
Definitely. And I also think they can define how much you enjoy a book. If you go and find, like now you gave us a few names to check out. And I think that's really good when you also get excited about the narrator, because you know that at least the narration, independently of the book that you're about to read, you are going to enjoy.
And I think that actually there are a lot of listeners who follow narrators simply because of their performance and style, and will really go for the narrator first. So they will go on the AudioFile website and go to Julia Whalen's page, for instance, and they see the titles that she's done recently, and they will listen simply because it's Julia Whalen, and discover what it is that she is discovering in that title. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, because the narration can kind of make or break a book. Like I've given up, unfortunately, on audiobooks because I just didn't connect with the narration for some reason. And then I had trouble listening because, of course, listening requires a lot of concentration sometimes. And unfortunately, I have given up on audiobooks because of that.
Well, it happens. I
Yeah.
mean, not every performance is a brilliant match to the work.
And it's personal as well. Sometimes it's like it's
That
not,
too.
the performance isn't good. It's just not for me. Like a little bit like stories.
Yes, yes, indeed.
Do you have any tips that you can give people on how to choose an audiobook?
Just what we were talking about here a minute ago, it's often a good idea if you can recognize you enjoy an audiobook and you see that it might have been recorded by Edoardo Ballerini, then you could look based on that for something else that he's done. I think that reading independent reviews, reading someone's opinion about audiobooks is a great way to do it. You know, I'm not the biggest fan in the world of user reviews because I think sometimes they're very formulaic, simply because some of the sites make it that way. You know, you're supposed to be answering 4 questions. So, you know, that's not, that doesn't really it may give you enough tips to listen, to pick your next audiobook. But I think sometimes a well thought out bit of an actual written review, a bit of conversation, some comment that someone will make in a different context. I mean, we have all those things available to us. And I think that's a great way to listen. Also, I highly recommend listening to the clips before you start and make that commitment. You better, you know, and I think that oftentimes you, as a listener, you know, after maybe 30 seconds or a minute, you get what, 2-3 minutes of in most clips, you've got a pretty good idea of what you don't know what really the story is, but what the voice is going to be.
Yeah. Would you like to also talk about audiobooks in the context of families, especially children?
Oh, absolutely. I would love to talk about that because I'm a huge fan. And I think it's one of the greatest ways that families can come together for a shared experience around a book and make that extend into conversation in a way that is really quite magical. You know, I think with little children, it's very easy to sit and read a book with them. It gets harder and harder as the children get older, but it doesn't, you know, and I think as a parent, I always missed it as my son got older. And, you know, and then when we started to listen to audiobooks, we were back together having that experience of listening to a book on the way to school, on a long trip. And truly, we have that shared connection over books that we can still talk about today.
That is super sweet. Yeah. Like
and of course, yeah.
Yeah, I've spoken with other people who have also that they listened in the car, like in big trips. There's also like the Lost Children archive. I listened to the audiobook, and in some scenes they also listen to the audiobooks together. Yeah, that sounds like such a good way to connect and then talk about the books that you're listening to.
Right. And, you know, they're great conversation starters and all of that. And that's not even the more formal literacy, the benefits that, you know, from an educational point of view for children, whether they're listening alone or whether they're with parents or siblings, is, you know, they can often listen to stories way above their reading level. So if they can comprehend the story that they're hearing, usually quite a bit before they have the skill to decipher all of the text aspects of the same story.
Of course.
And, you know, there's nothing like getting the real flavor for, you know, readers, or young readers, from a dialect or dialogue that is beautifully presented the way the the way the author intended it to be. But to read dialect that's been written is takes a lot of sophisticated reader to get that and to hear the musicality of what the author intended. And of course, that for adults, that's totally true as well in audiobook listing.
And what does it take to create an audiobook? Because I'm going to just do like a side note here, in the sense that I know with AudioFile Magazine, I'm not sure how involved you are in creating the audiobooks itself. So just feel free to answer to this how you find better.
Not at all. We're not at all involved in creating audiobooks in any way. So we get all the audiobooks that we talk about from someone else, another creator. So whether it's a publisher, an independent author, all we do is talk about them, and we don't sell them. we can't get one for you. We can only talk to you about it and recommend it, or help you find what you're looking for.
Because I got to this question and I kind of realized, no, this is not, AudioFile Magazine does not create. They only talk about the books, of course.
Right. So that's it. That's our angle.
Tell us about the Audiobook Sync program for teen audiences and the free audiobooks you offer every year.
Oh, that is a very fun program. Audiobook Sync runs in the summer, usually between April, before in the US, the schools are out, and then through early August, usually. We have a program for teen listeners where we have 2 free audiobooks that are available every week. There's sort of a pair, maybe not an obvious pair, but there's a thematic connection between the 2 books, and they're available just for 1 week. They're free. And then we go on to another wonderful pair. But it is a great program. I think we've had over 10 seasons of this Audiobook Sync program. Publishers have been very supportive. The narrators loved it. And of course, we have lots of happy listeners, often teachers, who will give the information to their students for the summer, or library summer reading programs, all of that kind of thing.
I remember that like a few years back, I was living all by myself and I didn't have like a lot of money to spend on audiobooks. So when I heard about the program, I was so excited about it. It was, I think, especially for people who don't get a lot of books or audiobooks, it's such a joy to be able to enjoy something like that just for free. And for the summer, it's really something to look forward to.
Oh, it is. And of course, they don't go away. So, I mean, you can only get them between and that 1 week, but they're yours. So you can listen to them at any time. And, the choices of the audiobooks, it's again a part of the discovery of unusual titles that teens might not come across. And, free is always a good incentive.
Yeah, of course. And to also discover more, even people, because I remember getting the emails and kind of, let's see what is available now. And it's kind of an incentive to search for them through other ways, because sometimes you have apps that you can pay monthly that are a bit cheaper. You can have, I think, Overdrive also from libraries in the US, where you can get it from your library. So I think it's amazing to just give like this sample, first of all, for people who need it, like the free audiobooks, but also for kids that just stumble upon it and then eventually go to get and to listen to more.
It is great. And we particularly like when the publishers will work with us to select something, maybe at the first in a series, because of course, once you're hooked, then you've got to listen to all of them. And that's good for everyone.
For sure.
And one of the things that this is not factual exactly, but we have been running the program for 10 years, and we've had usually between 30 and 50,000 people downloads. And I mean, that's how many downloads we've had in the summertime. And the demographics of listeners is getting younger and younger. So not facetiously say, it's because we've been building this audience of teen listeners. So now in the demographic group in their 20s are, that's one of the fastest growing listener groups.
Well, it's okay, you don't have the data, but I mean, there's a high chance that it is. It influences that.
We certainly have influenced a lot of young listeners and built that audience. So that was the point. So.
And what is your favorite way to listen to audiobooks? And just to make this more clear, I mean, what do you like to do when you listen to audiobooks?
I do like to listen while I'm driving, because I'm not being distracted. And I also like to listen while I'm cooking, as long as it's not too complicated, because then I have to pause.
Then there goes the dinner. What do you have to say regarding the whole audiobooks aren't reading debate?
I don't really have very much to say, because I think that this has been a conversation that's been ongoing for a long time. I think we know that there are many kinds of learners. There are many kinds of ways to take in information, and that listening to information and stories, to me, has always been equal. But certainly the data and the educational information on this has proven that it's really can be the same thing. Not for everybody, but it can be. In fact, it can be a better experience for many listeners. So I think it's kind of an old argument that I don't have much enthusiasm of talking about anymore.
Yeah, I can imagine. I just get really upset when people just kind of use that, and especially because it's usually as a way to dismiss audiobooks and dismiss the way that people read, and it's very ableistic, of course, because a lot of people can't read books any other way for various reasons. So I just wanted to see the take from someone who actually works with audiobooks daily.
Right. Well, I've fought this battle for all these years, trying to even explain early on what an audiobook was. And I think in the early, years ago, people were very dismissive of this. I don't hear it very much anymore. But I think, the biggest thing is we need to encourage readers.
Yeah.
And if people are reading with their ears and taking in the stories and the information, there is no downside to this. So it's really it's a win for everyone.
Absolutely. I would really like to know where people can find you online.
We have a lot of presence online. AudioFileMagazine.com is our website. We have a incredibly complex website of articles and interviews, over 50,000 reviews of audiobooks. We have 2 podcasts, the Audiobook Break podcast that I mentioned, and also if you're a podcast listener, as we presume everyone who's listening to this is, we have Behind the Mic with AudioFile Magazine, which is a daily podcast where we just talk about one audiobook. One of our editors and the host takes on one audiobook, plays a clip, talks about it for about 4 minutes, and we're done. So you can either think that's an interesting title or move on. There'll be another one tomorrow. So that's a fun way that people can find us. But our recommendations are in a lot of places. We have a social presence as well, and newsletters, but you can find all that on audiofilemagazine.com.
Perfect. Now, this is always the last question of the podcast, but I am going to make a little change, of course, to fit the theme today. And I would like to ask you for an all-time favorite audiobook and an audiobook you would recommend right now.
Okay, so my all-time favorite is Philip Pullman's his Dark Materials series, which in the US started with the Golden Compass, but it's called Northern Lights, I think, in the UK and Europe. And it's a full cast, unabridged recording, not dramatized. It's word for word, and in a very just an incredible performance of that work by Pullman, who is one of my favorite authors. So that's an all-time favorite. Backed up by, I have to say, my second favorite is probably Neil Gaiman's The Graveyard Book.
Oh my God. I'm so sorry, because it's one of my favorites. I've listened to it over than 10 times, and sorry, I just get very excited about this, but carry on.
Good. Well, that's why it's on my list. It is spectacular, and it's one of the greatest examples of the brilliance of authors being able to read their own audiobooks and tell their own stories. So that's fun, because both of those are not new, but they're
No.
new. If they're new to someone, a listener, they're well worth it. So let's see. So to recommend something right now, I would come back to one of the mysteries that I was talking about. I loved Louise Penny's The Madness of Crowds, which has just come out with Robert Bathurst, and also Daniel Silva's The Cellist, read by Eduardo Ballerini.
Very well. Thank you so much for those recommendations. And thank you for coming to the podcast. It was really, really interesting talking to you.
Oh, fun. It was fun for me too. Karina, thank you so much.
Thank you. You can access today's show's notes via my pod page, which you can find along with all of my social media links at linktree/Karine Pereira. In there, you'll also find a link to a Story of Sorts playlist available on Libro FM, containing the audiobooks recommended by our guests, which will be updated as the show progresses. If you'd like to give Libro FM a try, you can use the code A Story of Sorts at checkout to get 2 books for the price of 1. This offer is valid for new Libro FM members in the US and Canada. Libro FM is an audiobook platform which allows you to buy audiobooks directly from an indie bookstore. Check them out. If you have enjoyed this episode, please consider supporting A Story of Sorts on Patreon. Patreon is a platform which allows you to contribute monthly to the podcast in exchange for extra content, such as early access to episodes, a shout-out at the end of an episode and on Instagram, and choosing a theme for me to talk about on the podcast. You can become a patron at patreon.com/A Story of Sorts. I'd also be very grateful if you would simply leave a review and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. And thank you for listening.